Coming up this week on Premiere Quest.
Yeah, that's turned into a bit of a disaster pretty quickly.
And also, the boys try to apply Michael Scott's 5 rules to business.
Listen, your feet are not dry. You want them to be wet, but not literally wet, metaphorically wet. So you got to adapt.
So sit back and enjoy Am I Michael Scott?
Welcome, listeners and sometimes viewers from YouTube. This is Premiere Quest Podcast. My name is Luke. I'm joined by Richard. Richard, you've just finished shouting the words Dave Matthews at me. Care to explain?
Dave Matthews.
Oh,
We've sort of set up a code word where wherever we yell Dave Matthews, that we have some sort of audio issues at our end and can't hear each other. So if you hear that throughout this episode, that's what's going on.
Yeah, and for listeners/viewers overseas, the internet in New Zealand, it's pretty new. It's in its infancy. It's been here for arguably, I don't know, what would it be, 6 weeks, Richard?
6 weeks, 6 years, somewhere in between.
Yeah, and therefore, of course, we've just got the broadband. We're having issues. So if you hear us shout Dave Matthews, you know what's going on. Anyway, welcome to the world's finest satirical life advice podcast that's based in New Zealand. We deal with your deep issues on a weekly basis, and we upload to both Libsyn, or your normal podcasting apps, and also YouTube now. And Richard, I'd love to ask you, it's been 2 weeks. How are you finding being a YouTube celebrity?
It's been a bit daunting for the last couple of weeks since we went live on that platform. We've had the legal authorities come after us. We've been demonetized instantaneously on our first episode.
For the most hilarious reason as well. We played and reviewed, so it's arguably fair use, like a 6-second snippet of a Bruce Willis song.
But we are getting a surprising number of people actually sitting down and watching the episodes end to end, even though it's just a still image, which is probably the most surprising thing of all.
However, guys, if you do pay close attention to this week's YouTube video, you'll note the odd picture of Michael Scott pop up, and it's just a little treat for people who decide to stick it through and stare at that still image for the solid 30 minutes.
That wasn't really a leading statement, was it?
Oh, yeah, I just
just
realized
sort of
that. Well, you haven't actually introduced the episode.
That was the kind of comment that someone gives when they're leading on to the other person to sort of follow on. But we're having a bit of a Dave Matthews situation there, and I missed the not-so-subtle cue we're supposed to chime in.
Man, I wish we could play Dave Matthews underneath our discussion today, but we've been demonetized straight away. And for a podcast with the viewership we have at the moment on YouTube, that'd be career-ending.
So today, we're going to go back to the classic Premiere life advice situation, and we've got another couple of your problems here to resolve today, including one individual wanting to pet strangers' dogs, but don't want to have to talk to the owners at the same time.
Yeah. We've also here's a little insight into another one. This person is interested in how they can make their feet not dry.
And the last one we might look into, or we might not, we can't really predict where this episode's going to go.
Dave Matthews.
This other individual wants to drink 6 cups of Premiere Quest coffee a day, but doesn't think that it's good for them. So we're going to find some solutions there. And how we're going to do it this week is we're going to do what seems to be popular, and we're going to rely on Michael Scott's life advice to sort of diagnose and remedy these situations. Those for you not familiar with Michael Scott, he's the boss or manager from the US sitcom The Office, where his character is one of the more popular characters in recent time, often being compared to Oprah or Obama in terms of his importance.
Yeah.
So to give a bit of an example of what Michael Scott's all about, is he's pretty big on declaring bankruptcy. He's really big into Secret Santa.
Yes.
He once finished making his own action movie.
He dreams of opening a shoe store called Shoe La La.
He was once set up on a date with a girl called Wendy, and he rang up Wendy's thinking that he's going to speak to a Wendy, but it was in fact the burger restaurant. And he emotional quite often in a very unprofessional way. So maybe some of these problems today, we can see whether they'll translate to issues both professional and unprofessional. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to look at Michael Scott's official 5 rules of business and see if we can apply them to some of these situations.
Yes, and for fans of the series The Office and Dunder Mifflin, of course, the paper company, this business advice comes from the episode, I think it's called Fire Guy, in which the character Ryan inadvertently leaves a Peter pocket in either the toaster or the microwave and sets into course in a series of events where the office is evacuated.
I'd hate to sort of correct you so early on in this episode, Luke, but the advice is from Season 2, Episode 4, The Fire.
The Fire, yeah. Fire. It's where Ryan gets called Fire Guy by Kevin, isn't it?
Yeah, so hit us with an issue, Luke, and let's crack into it.
All right, well, there's no better place to start, in my opinion, than the issue I alluded to earlier, which is coming from listener Slizzer P, and it says, how do I make my feet not dry? So while this isn't specifically a business-related question, I think there's a possibility we could apply Michael Scott's business tips to this, depending on what they are. So, Richard, you're the man with the info. Lay it out.
These business rules seem to be eerily similar to the Tony Robbins advice that we gave last episode.
Yeah.
And it's frightening how similar Michael Scott is to Tony Robbins. So his first rule of business is you have to play to win, and you also have to win to play. I'll just repeat that once more. You have to play to win, and you also have to win to play. First thoughts, Luke, on how we can solve this?
Yeah, and wasn't Tony Robbins... Well, Tony Robbins' one was something like, if you can't, you must, and if you must, you can. So there's almost without a doubt that the writers are taking the piss out of that exact statement, aren't they, with this?
It sounds that way.
Okay, so can you read it out again?
You have to play to win, and you also have to win to play.
Okay, so this individual, the thing is, I don't particularly understand the life advice question, to be totally honest. How do I make my feet not dry? So I'm assuming they're not just meaning, how do I wet my feet? Because otherwise I would have said, how do I make my feet wet? What they must be referring to is, how do they make their feet not, scabby? Is that right?
So we seem to have a situation here where one of our listeners, Slizzer P, must have been bitten by...
Scabby feet?
Must have been bitten by a lizard or something. And are slowly developing dry scales on her feet. She's trying to prevent that. She's this lizard purse version of Spider-Man.
And so she's got to play to win. And so is there any type of game in which perhaps you might wet your feet? Water polo maybe? Swimming? Petanque?
Maybe it's more of a metaphorical. Maybe we go less literal and more metaphorical.
Yeah. I'm really struggling with this one.
Well, you have to win to play, but you have to play to win, but you also have to win to play. And to prevent her from getting these dry, lizard, scaly feet.
We've definitely hit a roadblock with this piece of advice from Tony Robbins / Michael Scott. So is there any way we could hear his second business tip to see if we can get any insight into what that actually may mean?
Yeah, it's turned into a bit of a disaster pretty quickly. Rule 2. Adapt, react, readapt, act.
Oh dear. Okay, adapt. Listen, your feet are not dry. You want them to be wet, but not literally wet, metaphorically wet. So you got to adapt.
Slizzer P's lizard feet, she needs to adapt to a lizard feet situation. So she needs to instantaneously move to a swamp where some lizards live.
Yes.
And then she needs to sort of react to her surroundings. So rather than living in a nice dry house, she's now become a swamp person. And then she needs to readapt. What's she readapting to in this situation?
Well, I got a counter argument. People often buy alligators' feet key rings from younger alligators, and they're quite hot property in Louisiana. So what I'm saying is adapt here. So there's a P, cut off the current lizard feet you've got, turn them into key rings, sell them. And then the readapt step is maybe replacing those with those carbon fiber blades that you see in the Olympics. The beauty with those, you could grease them up in Vaseline, and I'm assuming they'll stay essentially wet for months.
And that leads perfectly into advice piece number 3, or number 4 actually. He seems to gloss over rule 3. So rule 4, in business, image is everything. So now that you've got your greased up carbon fiber feet, You're the image of perfection, and you have to own those feet. Because in business, image is everything.
That's exactly right. Yeah, remember when Michael Scott falls in love with the cheer model, and he's fallen in love with essentially just her image, which highlights his true belief of the fact that image is everything. So what I may be thinking is, Sliza P, with those new greased up carbon fiber legs, maybe you could become some sort of office wear model, but maybe advertising those kind of stools that go under desks that allow people to, keep a good posture. So you've got those greasy fiber things down on that stool, people are looking at the photos, and that image is very powerful, and image is everything.
And maintaining that good posture leads perfectly into rule number 5, safety first, i.e. don't burn the building down.
Yeah, and it really casts a sort of a dim light over all of the advice, really, because greased up carbon fiber feet blades, I can't imagine that particularly safe.
Yeah, there'll be all sorts of hazardous situations there. One of the problems that she could get into a vicious cycle here is those carbon fiber blades eventually start rusting and drying up, and they'll start getting scales on them, hence starting this cycle over again of getting lizard scales.
Yeah, and as we know, it becomes much more difficult to cut off carbon fiber feet than flesh feet. So I guess essentially we're going to have to issue a form of disclaimer on this advice, Liza P. Although Richard and I are probably both quite confident in the advice, you need to be aware of the fact that this is one of those pieces of advice that if you implement, it's very difficult to rewind it back.
I would like to offer my first apology for season 6 here.
Yes.
This piece of advice we've just provided is not up to, I suppose, the usual Premier Quest standards.
How dare you?
Not in terms that it won't work, just in terms of the probability of you've just encouraged someone to cut off their feet, Luke. No.
Metaphorically, not literally. I don't know exactly what we mean by cut off your feet, but what I think we really mean is like cut off that part of your brain or your thought pattern that is obsessing over these dry feet. Because the moment you sort of stop thinking about it and thinking that everyone's looking at your scaly feet, that sets you free to live your best life. And when you're living your best life, believe it or not, your feet are going to get wetter. They're going to become less dry. So that's what I think we really meant.
And reflecting back on the last episode, once you start getting your feet wet, don't forget to wash them thoroughly.
That's exactly right.
We spent a lot of time discussing people only washing 30% of their feet, where you should aim for about 70% of it. And if you don't know what we're talking about, go back to episode 2, where we applied Tony Robbins' advice to should you wash more of your foot when you wash your feet.
I just don't think we were playing to win and winning to play with that first piece of advice. So I'd like to issue my second apology for season 6. It's a formal apology, and it's also a retraction. I would like to formally retract all the life advice we've given in this episode to point. And I think, Richard, we just straight up tell this Liza P character, just apply the advice from the previous episode. Try and wet more of your feet in the shower, actually cleaning that dirt off. And once you've cleaned that dirt off, then your feet, the water can penetrate that.
And I, Luke, thinking with you in mind, I would like to retract your attraction and go back to the advice and reinstate the advice we gave in this episode, but less in a metaphorical sense and more of a literal sense of Sissa P removing her feet and getting some sweet blades.
And here, folks, is a very, very rare occurrence of Richard and I disagreeing on life advice. Normally we find some common ground. Richard seems to be firmly in the cut the feet off camp, and I'm more in the wash your feet camp. And it's actually quite a good lesson to listeners in that, sometimes you're part of a perfect team, but it's fine to disagree with your other perfect team member at times, because it's just life.
Yeah, there's ups and downs and there's lots of challenges, but we attempt to try to find some sort of common ground. So let's move on to the second problem and try to apply these 5 rules for business again. So this issue comes from one of our Canadian listeners who says that she wants to pet strangers' dogs but doesn't want to have to talk to their owners. So Luke, rule 1, you have to play to win, but you also have to win to play.
This is a very clear example of this is something she wants. She's quite tentative about doing it because I'm assuming she thinks there's some sort of social etiquette and that you must address the owner of a pet when you pet. But the thing is, you got to play to win and you got to win to play. So what I'm suggesting is Smachel. I'm assuming this has come from Smachel.
Yes.
You've just got to get out there and do it. So go to a park, a local park, make sure you're rugged up because I understand it's quite cold in Canada, and just do it. Pick 5 dogs and 5 owners and just go and do it and see what the results are.
You're about 50% of the way there, Luke, because that encompasses the you have to play to win part of the advice. But how does the you have to win to play piece fit into this?
Well, she's never going to be able to pet the dogs without talking to the owners, without actually petting the dogs. So you never know. She could go and pet a dog and the owner might not even notice. So what I guess I'm suggesting is maybe pet the dogs without letting the owner notice.
Yeah, so if we sort of break it down, the play part is obviously petting the dogs, and the win part is not talking to the owners.
Yes.
So in order you have to win to play, encourage you just to go up to random dogs and start petting them and just sort of blank the owners and not say a word. And when they address you, that's your perfect chance to move into rule 2 of adapt, react, readapt, act.
Yeah, exactly. And Richard, what about this approach? Adapt as in either pretending like she cannot hear the people talking to her or maybe cannot understand the people talking to her. And if that doesn't work, readapt as if she cannot speak back. So the language barrier is maybe a clear way to go about that. Maybe, you come from New Zealand, I think. Maybe just speak some of our native language today and pretend that's the only language you speak, and then you avoid having to engage.
And then the last part, the act part. Do you have any suggestions there? I fear that all my suggestions will sort of get her into legal trouble.
Yeah, Richard, are you familiar with the concept of furries?
I am. Do you want to sort of give a brief explanation as to what furries are?
Are they the furries, the people who wear these like really elaborate animal kind of suits? Because I don't know exactly why, but is it some form of fetish or something?
Yeah, so what are you suggesting here?
Well, I'm sort of suggesting this listener could maybe act as if she was one of these animals in the first place. So she could wear a furry costume, go to the parks and sort of wait for a dog to approach her and then get in some real good pats. And I'd be stumped if anyone wants to talk to a furry.
So there's your adapt, react. Readapt means that you've now become a dog.
A furry.
You've now become a furry. Living in the park in the Canadian winter. And that is how you're going to act from here on out. But keeping that in mind, rule 4 in business, image is everything. So now that you've established your dominance as the homeless furry in the park, refusing to interact with humans and just petting dogs, is that really the image that you want to cultivate for yourself and all the business successes that entails?
Yeah, 100%. Or maybe it's sort of suggesting if you're going to do this, if you're committed to becoming a furry in the park, buy the best possible furry costume. Don't skimp and buy a budget version. We're talking high roller, high baller stuff here. It needs to be like so perfect that, dogs want to approach you.
And of course, rule 5, safety first. Don't burn the building down. So while you're living as a homeless furry in the park, petting random dogs, always keep in mind safety. As without safety, you will never generate any profits.
Yeah, and in the end of the day, this is all about profits. So how would you profit from being a furry in the park, Richard?
Going back to the image is everything, people will start to observe this homeless furry living in the park in winter, and they'll become a bit envious and want to become like that. So she can profit by petting more and more dogs, and every pet you might get a couple of dog hairs caught on your hand. After a couple of months, you will have accumulated enough dog hair from petting random dogs to start building and selling your own furry costumes to like-minded individuals. Hence, profit.
I literally can't see any faults with that, and I am very proud of the way you handled it, Richard. I'd like to move on to our third request for life advice. This one's a bit bleak, but it did make me giggle when I received it. If I live by myself, do I need to buy a lounge suite?
Dave Matthews, I missed that. Can you please repeat that?
Here we go again, listeners/viewers. If I live by myself, do I need to buy a lounge suite?
So employing Michael Scott's 10 rules in business for his employees to learn. Rule 1, you have to play to win, and you also have to win to play.
Yeah, so what is the playing here and what is the winning?
I think the winning here is I think the winning here is self-acceptance. And what I sort of mean by that is this person seems to have some insecurities about living by themselves and whether they have to conform to social norms of getting a lounge or not. So the ultimate winning here, I see, is acceptance of oneself, where either decision here is the correct decision. And the playing is then obviously either buying a lounge suite or not buying a lounge suite. So to have to play to win means that you either have to buy one or not buy one, and you win. It's self-acceptance. But in order to play, you also have to win. So you need a...
I cannot follow this.
So you need to accept who you are as an individual before you are able to make this decision and buy that lounge piece.
Yeah. And I also kind of am thinking along these lines, no, you may not necessarily need the space that a lounge suite affords in terms of sitting all the time. But picture this situation: you invited people over for a dinner or to watch movies, and you've just got a fold-out chair or a single chair. I don't know, the kind of vibe that you put off into the world and to the people who have arrived to your house with that kind of a move is quite kind of depressing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and also picture this. Zombie apocalypse, 2020. Zombies are coming through for your door, but you have no furniture to block the door. That's where a lounge suite would come in handy. So you can lean it up against the door, ensuring your survival.
Yeah, that's definitely right. It's a practical solution. And the other thing is, whatever step it is, step 4 in business, image is everything. People, it's the point I raised earlier, people who are going to come and hang out with you, and if you're taking selfies and you've got all this empty room in your lounge, or you've got 3 or 4 treadmills or something like that occupying the space that would have been occupied by a lounge suite, that image that you're putting into the world again is pretty bleak.
Yeah, and nothing is more bleak than having these zombies burst through your front door. They come in and they look around and there's no lounge suite, and they just get a little bit too depressed to even eat your brains. I feel like my advice, can I have another crack at my advice? So I'm going to go this sort of counter approach to yours. So you've been playing on the whole, people may think you have a bleak existence if you don't have a lounge as they come round. I'm going to go the opposite route and say that people will be in awe of you when they come round, and instead of a sweet lounge suite, instead they see a massive dance floor with disco ball in place of somewhere to sit.
That's actually pretty bad AS. Hold on, someone's knocking at the door. Just give me a bit of a Dave Matthews.
So instead of conforming to social norms of living in a normal property and having a lounge suite, suggest that you leave your house or apartment immediately and move into the local disco club, therefore justifying the reason not to have a lounge suite at all. And every night, as you slave away starting at 3 p.m. in the afternoon until 5 a.m. in the morning, you'll be content with the knowledge that nobody had to sit. But I suppose the downside from that is all your friends, when they come over, will be constantly dancing, and they'll have some pretty sore and tired legs, which could lead to some sort of long-term injuries, preventing them from actually coming around in the future due to too much dancing. So maybe if you're playing to win, then you have to win to play. And if your long-term aim is to have no interactions with anyone, encourage you to move into a disco club, make everyone really tired from too much dancing, and then they won't have the energy ever to come around again. Sort of sorting this issue once and for all. But always maintain safety first, so don't burn the building down. So if you do buy a lounge suite, make sure that it's not flammable, and if you do go with the disco option, make sure that there's a fire hydrant there. Well, fire hydrant's probably a pretty weird thing to have in a disco lounge.
Wait, I'm back, Dave Matthews. For the second time in as many years, Richard, this podcast has been interrupted by the exact same Jehovah's Witness people.
Were you shirt on or shirt off this time?
Shirt off.
So if we go back, you have to play to win and you have to win to play. So if the play here is taking your shirt off some Jehovah's Witnesses, what were you hoping to win?
Well, I guess I was hoping to assert my dominance and maybe win a couple more fans for the podcast. I did have to cut off the conversation and say, sorry, I'm just recording a podcast. And I said, oh, what on? And I said, life advice.
You know, I hate to sort of give you a bit of grief here, but there would have been some perfect opportunity to hand out some samples of Premier Quest merchandise, including the Premier Quest coffee and Premier Quest hot sauce, now available at premierquest.com.
Well, I mean, if I actually had some. So that does put the fire under my seat to actually go online to premierquest.com, www.premierquest.com, and order some for myself.
Use the code word Squire Heath to pay twice the price.
Have you tried the hot sauce?
I have not yet. It's going to go on to some food later today. Yeah, we shouldn't really probably be selling stuff that we haven't tried ourselves.
Yeah, that was sort of what I was getting at.
I have tried the Premier Quest Java today, and I'm buzzing off it. It's fantastic stuff.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. You got to play to win and you got to win to play. So here's the final one. I think we just leave that lounge one because, to be honest, it's getting under my skin. I'm a little bit worried about that listener. I need to move on.
You might have missed this while you were shirt off, but we sort of rounded that out in those couple of minutes you were at the door.
Okay, fantastic. Hey, here's the final one that I've got. Corn gives me hot brown rain, but it's my favourite food. What do I do?
You just had to go down this track, didn't you?
Well, of course, we've got a long and checkered past of promoting the product Diastop, which of course stops diarrhea. So why not keep on keeping on with another possible promotion of said product?
Which listener is having this issue?
I feel like if I reveal the listener's name, I'm perhaps giving too much away, and at times we do have to apply discretion.
Yeah, but this will be a chance where if you reveal their identity, they will lose honour in the sight of in the eyes of all their friends and family, and they'll have to embark on a side quest, potentially moving to Auckland to be able to regain that honour. And we are experts in giving advice on that.
True. All right. So this advice comes in from listener Smitchett.
No, it doesn't, Luke. You are covering the identity of the real pooper here. Is this advice you're looking for yourself here that you're too embarrassed to talk about?
No, God, no. I would never eat corn. Is
that because you're a regular user of Diastop?
Yeah, exactly. I don't worry about these kind of things because I am always hyperdosing on Diastop. I'm 300 or 400 milligrams deep every minute of every day. I actually think this is an inappropriate thing to consider at this late part of the episode, and I'm wondering if we ever even think about considering it.
I think the diarrhea talk might alienate some of our listeners and put us again into that niche corner we're trying to avoid.
True, and especially some of our newer YouTube listeners. Shout out to you, our listeners, and I hope you've stayed and you've stared at the screen for the entire time. You've seen those brief pop-ups of the character Michael Scott from the episode, who's so, generously graced us with his business tips. Rich, have you got any parting words as we leave today's stunning episode?
If in life you have a number of situations and issues facing you, figure out the kind of individual you are. Are you a Bruce Willis, a Tony Robbins, or perhaps a Michael Scott? Once you've decided, listen to the episode, take that advice, and apply it to your life. If everything turns to rubbish, just declare bankruptcy.
Yep, or take some Diastop, and that'll prevent everything from turning into further shit. Hey, as is tradition with these Am I episodes, Richard, what percentage Michael Scott are you feeling yourself to be right now?
Well, I'm feeling that I'm a third Bruce Willis, a third Tony Robbins, and a third Michael Scott right now. So I'm going to try a combination of all of the advice at once for some of the problems I've got later today that will be revealed in the coming episodes.
That's fantastic stuff. Hey, folks, I think I'm probably sitting at about a third as well. I'm pushing maybe 40% because I'm feeling less badass today, so I'm feeling less Bruce Willis. And especially after that copyright claim, I don't think that's the kind of thing I'd do, but it's clearly the type of thing that Bruce Willis and or his representatives would do. Hey, so next episode is the long-awaited sequel to Shoe Wars 1, in which I lead Richard through a discussion of 5 or so different shoes, get his thoughts, we apply them to life in general. It's more really an episode that I use to aggravate Richard, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, I can't wait.
We don't do these often. It's maybe a season type thing, and of course we'll upload pictures of each of the shoes before the episode goes live, so you guys can have a real fun time swiping through them on Instagram. It's incredibly interactive, and I think it's arguably the best work we do.
And we'll also have these shoes up on the website premierquest.com, and while you're there, don't forget to buy some Premier Quest coffee or a hot sauce. All the proceeds from this hot sauce and coffee go to fund our ultimate Premier Quest of heading to Africa to record a series of this podcast on a houseboat.
Yes, that's exactly right. And thanks for everyone who's stuck through. If you've done so on YouTube, please hit that thumb that says like and subscribe as well, because apparently that is really awesome, but we're yet to really see the impact of that. And that's it, folks.